Albert believed that the only way to preserve the monarchy was to improve the conditions of the poor. The British people had to be persuaded that free trade would bring in a new age of peace and prosperity, not just for the manufacturers, but for the whole nation. The problem was, how were they to be convinced?
Albert liked the idea of using trade to liberalize the world in general. He liked the idea of trade creating communications and a better life for people worldwide.
Prince Albert believed that free trade was not just an economic theory, it was almost a sort of religion. Free trade would provide universal happiness throughout the world.
In 1849, Prince Albert met one of the great prophets of this new religion, Henry Cole, writer, artist, architect, and one of those Victorian gentlemen who buzzed with ideas that could change the world. He told the prince of his bold new dream. They would build a cathedral of free trade, a giant temple in the heart of London, to exhibit the art and industry of all nations. Every country in the world would be invited to send the most beautiful and the most useful of its creations to London, to unite the world in a dream of universal peace through trade. The prince was enthralled.
Prince Albert was in many ways a very idealistic figure, and this was not only to project the majesty of Great Britain across the world, it was also to emphasize the fact that we were all interconnected.
Victoria shared Albert's enthusiasm and appointed him president of a royal commission to organize what would be known as the Great Exhibition of the Works and Industry of All Nations, the world's first international trade fair. The Queen offered one of the royal parks, Hyde Park in the center of London, as the site for the exhibition. But Prince Albert's vision was resisted by the same forces that had opposed the repeal of the Corn Laws. First, they objected that it would bring hordes of foreigners into London.
Well, there was very great concern about the invasion of foreigners into this country. Xenophobia, I think, was quite rife at that time. There was concerns about disease being brought into the city.
The critics then shifted their attack to the building itself. The plan first chosen by the Royal Commission resembled a giant dome. It was held to ridicule, but when it was revealed that a famous avenue of trees would have to be cut down to make room for it, the mirth turned to anger. Save the Trees became a popular rallying cry for Albert's critics in press and Parliament.
Are the trees to be sacrificed for one of the greatest frauds, greatest humbugs, greatest absurdities ever known?
The real target of this attack was Prince Albert himself. He was mocked as the uncrowned king of the royal nursery, the foreign stud who could sire 9 children, but was fit for little else. But behind the mockery was the fear that Albert represented a threat to the established order.
In many ways, Albert was far ahead of his time. People in government didn't want to move as fast as Albert wanted to move. And so he became something of a suspect person to the politicians who were more conservative than he was.
Victoria and Albert were at their wits' end. It wasn't just Albert's reputation that was at stake. It was their dream. The dream that world trade could secure world peace. The prince wrote to his brother Ernst in despair.
We shall probably be defeated and have to give up the whole exhibition. You see, we do not lie on a bed of roses.
Then, with the project on the verge of collapse, help came from an unexpected source. Joseph Paxton was a farmer's son. He had started work at the age of 15 as an under-gardener on the great estate of the Duke of Devonshire in the north of England. But like Brunel and Cole and so many other Victorians, Paxton had enormous self-belief and an imagination that soared beyond the limits of the Duke's plantations. His ideas for improvements caught the attention of his noble employer. They earned him rapid promotion. By the age of 40, he was manager of all the Duke's estates and an independently wealthy man with investments in bridges, railways, and gasworks. He even founded a newspaper with Charles Dickens as its editor. Paxton was the typical Victorian entrepreneur who seemed to excel at anything and everything. He knew that Prince Albert's exhibition was doomed without a building, so he turned his mind to designing one. He produced a preliminary sketch on a piece of blotting paper during a board meeting of one of his railroad companies. It was a giant greenhouse. Prince Albert and his team were delighted. A building made of glass could be assembled quickly and would do away with the need to cut down the trees in Hyde Park. The critics were felled with one stroke. In the fall of 1850, an army of 2,000 workmen descended on Hyde Park. The vast iron framework covering 19 acres of land was erected in just 9 weeks. The following week, 80 glaziers fitted 18,000 panes of glass. The critics prayed for a violent hailstorm, but it was a forlorn hope. Paxton's beautiful building won the hearts of the nation. It was opened by the Queen and Prince Albert on the 1st of May, 1851, and instantly became known as the Crystal Palace.
As far as the public was concerned, it was architecturally magical. It was such a marvellous building, it was so unlike anything that anybody had seen before, that in itself, I think, set the thing off on a marvellous passage.
For the first time, the Victorians saw their brave new world on show, with all its novelty and invention, and they were bewitched.
There was a tremendous impact. Everyone was excited to see this whole building and what was contained inside it. Within 3 months, over 6 million people visited, and when you consider the London population at that time was just over 2 million, that shows it had a tremendous international impact.
But it was the achievements of British industry that entranced the crowds who flocked to the Crystal Palace. The great exhibition was Britain's show.